What's a dark secret you want to get off of your chest? She even had another friend who occasionally joined our circle, and one day this woman slapped me across the face because she deemed me too loud. I was simply excited about being somewhere new, and that slap left an indelible mark on my psyche. This toxic environment completely destroyed my relationship with my mother. I felt her resentment growing, and in response, I became increasingly rebellious and bitter. I couldn't view her as a safe haven anymore, a devastating realization for an only daughter. I remember one incident when I arrived at school bearing bruises, prompting my teacher to schedule a meeting with my mother. She showed up with her friend in tow, and only later did I understand that this friend had coached her on what to tell the teacher. As a child, I didn't recognize the abuse as wrong. I believed I deserved it due to my hyperactive nature. Now, with adult perspective, I see how profoundly it affected me. I've attempted to repair my relationship with my mother, and while we're in a better place now, the childhood pain still lingers. I've told her how much I despise her friend, but she doesn't understand the depth of my childhood fear and insecurity. That constant fear and lack of safety destroyed my self-confidence. I overthink everything and live in perpetual fear of failure. I struggle to form and maintain friendships, often preemptively cutting people off before they have the chance to hurt me. Now that I have a son of my own, I cannot fathom treating any child the way I was treated. When I reflect on it, I break down in tears. I'm determined to provide my child with the safety, love, and support I never received. Story 21. I've come to a devastating realization. I am the toxic element in my friend group, the catalyst for nearly every conflict that erupts among us. Several months ago, my ex-boyfriend ended our relationship, stating he no longer felt any emotional connection to me. Before we dated, we had been best friends, and our lives had become deeply intertwined during our time together. I even relocated to a different city for our relationship. Though our breakup was amicable, with mutual agreement to maintain our friendship, I found myself unable to cope with seeing him within our shared social circle. I've descended into a pattern of excessive drinking and self-imposed isolation. My perception has become distorted. I see problems and enemies where none exist, triggering an endless cycle of conflicts, most of which I've instigated with our friends. The most painful aspect is the jealousy that consumes me when they experience joy and success in their lives. Instead of being the supportive friend who celebrates their achievements, I feel a bitter annoyance. It particularly stings to witness my ex's progress in overcoming his depression. The thought that they might be happier without me in their lives is excruciating. I'm acutely aware that my miserable existence is entirely my own doing. I'm trying to eliminate alcohol completely, recognizing how it only exacerbates my negative behaviors. Yet I can't shake the feeling that they would be better off without me in their lives. The only reason I haven't completely withdrawn is my paralyzing fear of solitude. They're 3 hours away, and I have no other connections where I currently live. My thoughts are a jumbled mess, and I feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of my problems, unsure how to begin fixing any of them. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of issues with no clear path to resolution. Story 22. This might not seem particularly dark, but it's keeping me awake at night, so here goes. Everyone, my friends, roommates, and family, thinks I'm simply afraid of bugs, but the truth is far more severe. I suspect I suffer from a genuine phobia. A few weeks ago, a mosquito became trapped in my room for several days, repeatedly biting me in my sleep. Though I know better, I've become obsessed with the irrational fear that I might have bed bugs. Despite all evidence to the contrary, I find myself compulsively vacuuming my mattress, washing my sheets repeatedly, and conducting exhaustive inspections. The worst part occurs when I'm exhausted. I experience phantom sensations of insects crawling on my skin, even though I know they're not real. This has become torturous and has begun to interfere with my ability to function normally in daily life. I'm finally starting to accept the logical evidence that I don't have bed bugs, but I'm ashamed to discuss this with anyone. I fear they would dismiss me as paranoid or mentally unstable, even though I know I'm not. I occasionally struggle with anxiety, and insects seem to trigger it in the most severe way. That's my deepest secret, I suppose. Story 23. One night, in a state of inebriation, I made the grave mistake of allowing strangers into my home. My brother and I quickly realized they were also heavily intoxicated. After several hours, most of them sobered up and departed, except for one individual who remained dangerously drunk. We politely asked him to leave, hoping to avoid any escalation of the situation. Instead of complying, he responded with a violent outburst, shouting, F***ck off, before producing a revolver from his pocket. In quick succession, he shot me in the arm and my brother in the stomach. My brother collapsed to the floor, but somehow, I managed to remain standing. In a panic-fueled moment, I lunged for the weapon, attempting to wrestle it from his grasp. During our desperate struggle, the gun discharged multiple times. Terrified that one of us would suffer another gunshot wound, I continued fighting for control of the weapon. Eventually, I I succeeded in wresting it away, but in the chaotic struggle, I accidentally shot him in the head. Despite the blood pouring from my own wound, I focused all my energy on helping my brother, somehow managing to get him to the hospital where, thankfully, he survived. I survived as well, though the trauma of that night has left an indelible mark on my psyche. Since that harrowing experience, I haven't touched a drop of alcohol. Not a single sip. Story 24. I'm plagued by an overwhelming sense of guilt regarding my wife's deception about having children. I love our 2 kids because they're mine, but I harbor a deep resentment about their very existence, as I never wanted to be a parent. I had made this abundantly clear to my wife before we even began dating, and she had expressed acceptance of this position. Years later, she secretly discontinued her birth control without informing me. I would have been perfectly willing to use condoms or other male contraceptive methods, but she made this life-altering decision unilaterally, without any discussion. Now we find ourselves trapped in a small, deteriorating town, living in a substandard house due to financial constraints. Even when opportunities for relocation arise, my wife refuses to leave her low-paying job. I'll never reveal to my children how much their existence has complicated my life, nor will I treat them poorly because of it. It's not their fault they're here. However, the truth is that their presence has derailed my life in ways from which I'll never recover. I'm maintaining this marriage solely to ensure my children don't grow up in a broken home, but once they're independent, I plan to leave. I've had divorce papers prepared since the birth of my youngest child. It's not just about the kids. My wife has committed other betrayals that have completely eroded my love for her. I've grown increasingly bitter and resentful toward her, but that's a story for another time. Story 25. My first sexual experience was a horrific assault, and at 19, I became a victim of human trafficking for 3 torturous months. After my escape, I focused on making myself invisible, terrified that he would find me. Initially, I was too paralyzed by fear to report the incident to law enforcement, but as time passed, I felt an overwhelming responsibility to prevent this monster from harming others. After several failed attempts, I finally mustered the courage to file a police report. However, the officers showed little empathy, their attitudes suggesting they blamed me for my own victimization. Whether due to desensitization or simple indifference to my plight, it was a humiliating and terrifying experience. Following the report, I suffered a severe panic attack on my way home and called the police, begging them to drop the case as I feared for my life. They assured me they would, but they didn't. A year later, he was arrested after new victims came forward. However, he was released due to insufficient evidence. According to the case file, he had assaulted over 20 women, was in the country illegally, and faced charges related to drugs and blackmail. Yet somehow, they claimed there wasn't enough evidence to keep him detained. This devastating blow triggered a complete mental breakdown. To survive, to keep my mind occupied, I enrolled in law school. It wasn't easy. I was battling trauma and undergoing therapy to cope, but I was determined to fight back. Even as I studied, I couldn't rest knowing this predator remained free. I took matters into my own hands, spending the next 2 years filing anonymous police reports detailing everything I knew: his crimes, his immigration status, his money laundering operations, and his residence address. Each time the police closed a report, I opened a new one, again and again. Finally, after years of persistence, the police conducted a raid and caught him trafficking people again. This time, he had escalated to facilitating the sexual exploitation of a child. My heart shattered, knowing all of this could have been prevented if the police had believed me and the other victims from the start. His case has been in Crown Court for over a year now, and I desperately pray he will finally face justice. He has evaded accountability for over a decade, and I cannot rest until I see him behind bars. I've become obsessed with bringing justice to myself and the other victims. If he's not found guilty again, I'll question everything, including my choice to become a lawyer. No one in my personal life knows about this, not my friends or family. Only the police and my therapists are aware. I've been through hell, both during and after the assault. My mental health has been severely damaged, and recovery feels like an endless uphill battle every day. This is my secret. Thank you for taking the time to read it. Perhaps, if I'm still here when the case concludes, I'll update this post with the result. Story 26. I've reached a painful epiphany. I am a terrible person, likely the primary source of nearly every conflict that arises within my friend group. A few months ago, my ex-boyfriend ended our relationship, stating he no longer felt any emotional connection to me. Before our romantic involvement, we had been best friends, and our lives had undergone significant changes during our time together. I even relocated to a different city. Despite the breakup being relatively peaceful and agreeing to maintain our friendship, I found myself unable to handle seeing him within our shared social circle. I began drinking excessively and isolating myself. My perception became distorted. I started seeing problems and enemies where none existed, leading to an endless cycle of conflicts, most of which I initiated with our friends. The most painful aspect is the jealousy I feel when they're happy and enjoying life. Instead of being a supportive friend who celebrates their progress, especially my ex's journey in overcoming depression, I feel annoyed. It hurts to think they might be happier without me in their lives. I recognize that my current miserable state is entirely my own responsibility. I'm attempting to quit drinking completely, acknowledging how it only exacerbates the situation, but I can't shake the feeling that they would be better off without me. The only reason I haven't distanced myself is my paralyzing fear of solitude. They're 3 hours away, and I have no other connections where I currently live. My thoughts are a chaotic jumble, and I feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of my problems, unsure how to begin fixing anything. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of issues with no clear path to resolution. Story 27. I'm planning to propose to my partner, so I can end my life without regrets. Just as some girls dream of their perfect wedding from childhood, I've always envisioned my ideal proposal. However, I've also been battling mental illness for over a decade, with 2 suicide attempts in my teenage years. I began therapy 2 years ago, and for the first year on antidepressants, I experienced improvement. But over the past 6 months, my old thought patterns and behaviors have resurfaced with crushing force. During this dark period, I made the decision to propose to my partner. We've been together for over a year, and I love him more deeply than anyone I've ever loved before. He knows about my proposal plans, but what he doesn't know is that the regret of never having that special moment with him is the only thing that stopped me from jumping off the balcony during my darkest moments. I'm aware this plan is incredibly selfish. Some might argue that if I truly loved him, I would quietly exit his life to spare him the devastating pain of losing a partner. I've considered this. After the proposal, I've thought about fabricating infidelity or doing something else to make him hate me, hoping it might lessen his grief when I'm gone. But I don't know how much longer I can hold on. In less than a week, I'll propose, and after that, I'm uncertain what will happen. I can't say which I'm anticipating more, placing the ring on his finger or finally feeling free of the one thing that's been holding me back. Story 28. When I was 8 or 9 years old, my father left me home alone while he mowed the lawn with our tractor. At some point, the machine ran out of fuel, so I helped pull it into the driveway for refilling. We only had those massive 5-gallon gas cans, which were quite heavy for a child my age. Nevertheless, I managed to fill the tank successfully until the very end, when I accidentally spilled gasoline all over the driveway, dangerously close to the house. I remembered hearing somewhere that cars could explode if they were running while being refueled, and my young mind somehow equated a puddle of gasoline next to the house as equally dangerous. Technically, I wasn't wrong. A large pool of gasoline is indeed hazardous. However, my solution was catastrophically misguided. I decided to light it on fire to burn it away. Initially, everything seemed under control. The gasoline ignited and began burning off as planned, but I had forgotten to move the gas can away before lighting the fire. The flame shot up to the nozzle, and suddenly the can itself was ablaze. Panicking, I rushed over to try and smother it by covering the hole with my finger, but in my haste, I knocked the can over. Gasoline spilled onto the house's siding, which immediately caught fire. I managed to replace the cap on the gas can, extinguishing that particular threat, then stripped off my shirt and began frantically patting down the flames on the house siding. The damage was severe. The siding was charred black. Terrified, I grabbed a bucket and soap, scrubbing the blackened siding as best I could. Fortunately, my father had been extremely thorough when painting the house, applying multiple layers of paint. Most of the burn marks came off after vigorous scrubbing, though the undersides of the slats remained scorched. A couple of nights later, I snuck out late, found some leftover paint in the basement, and carefully touched up the undersides of the slats. To this day, I don't think my father ever discovered how close I came to burning down our house. Story 29. I became intimately involved with my boss at work. There was an 8-year age gap between us. I'm 21F, he's 29M. He requested we keep our relationship discreet, citing his pending promotion that would require relocation. I didn't object, understanding the temporary nature of our arrangement. However, just before his departure, I discovered the real reason for his insistence on secrecy. He had a long-term girlfriend at home who was recovering from cancer. I was absolutely devastated by this revelation. When I immediately turned cold toward him, he responded by blocking me on all social media platforms, effectively preventing me from finding any information about her or understanding how I had missed her existence. The day after he left for his new position, he went on holiday and proposed to his girlfriend. Someone in our work group chat shared a screenshot of their Facebook engagement announcement, revealing her name and face. Part of me wants to reach out and expose the truth to her, that her new fiancé is a cheating scoundrel, but I've chosen to remain silent. They've been together for years, and from the post, it's clear she had been eagerly anticipating this proposal. After everything she's endured battling cancer, I feel compelled to let her have her moment of happiness. Instead, I simply pray that he doesn't subject her to the same betrayal he inflicted on me. Story 30. I've never been able to tell my best friend the real reason I ended things with my ex. At the time, I fabricated a story about my partner wanting to open up our closed relationship, a complete fabrication. For some inexplicable reason, I've clung to this lie instead of revealing the truth. The actual catalyst for our breakup occurred while watching The Office with my ex. As I observed the relationship between Jim and Pam unfold on screen, it hit me with stunning clarity. I had been in love with my best friend for the past decade, and I couldn't allow anything to stand in the way of pursuing that possibility. This realization prompted me to end things with my ex, despite her being an exceptional partner, kind, caring, and someone I genuinely loved. When I terminated our relationship, she admitted she had sensed it coming, which caught me off guard as I hadn't even seen it coming myself. I had been content in our relationship and had high hopes for our future, but I knew deep down that she deserved someone who wasn't in love with someone else. As for my best friend, we had a brief romantic connection back in high school, but since then, my feelings have remained unrequited. I'm grateful just to be part of her life and deeply value our friendship. I know we would be perfect together, but I can't force her feelings to align with mine. Still, I've never felt this level of certainty about love with anyone else. If the opportunity ever presented itself, I would marry her without hesitation. For now, though, I cherish our friendship, even if it's not exactly what I secretly hope for. Story 31. During my father's youth, he endured abuse at the hands of his father. Tragically, when he had me, he perpetuated that cycle of violence because I reminded him of himself. My mother was present, but she sometimes allowed the abuse to occur, or my father would strategically wait until she was absent. I finally escaped at 19, moving out with my first boyfriend, and now at 23, while the physical abuse has ceased, my father continues to manipulate me emotionally. We maintain a facade of normalcy, pretending nothing ever happened, but I can sense his underlying anger at my distance, at the fact that I'm far away, living with the man who took me from the house. Now I'm pregnant, and I've made an unwavering commitment to never raise a hand against my son. However, I'm haunted by the terrifying possibility that one day, in a moment of intense anger, I might hurt him just as my father hurt me. My boyfriend constantly reassures me that this won't happen. He points out how I can barely bring myself to put our dog in timeout without crying when he gives me those sad eyes. Still, the fear persists. I want to break this cycle completely, physically, emotionally, and mentally. I want my son to feel safe and loved in his own home, to experience an amazing childhood where his feelings are heard and validated. I don't know if this qualifies as a dark secret, but my childhood continues to haunt me, especially when random flashbacks assault me without warning. I just want to do better for my child. Story 32. My depressive episodes and BPD spirals often feel like internal implosions. I stop eating or binge on junk food, drink heavily alone at all hours, smoke weed continuously, and escape into anything I can find. These destructive patterns have led most of my high school acquaintances to assume I've probably ended my life by now. The most disturbing part is that I've grown comfortable living this way. I attempted suicide twice when I was younger because I couldn't handle the pain, and now I feel like I'm simply waiting out my days, or perhaps waiting to find an easier way to end it all. It feels inevitable. My life seems as insignificant as my mother's was. She couldn't help herself, became dependent on alcohol and sleeping pills, and spent her existence talking about suicide and regrets. She passed away in 2020 at 52 from an untreated heart condition and a blood clot. Nothing ever improved for her. She was one of the most devastated and depressed individuals I've ever known. Watching her spiral was heartbreaking, and now I find myself devastating those close to me in the same way. I'm in therapy and have become more self-aware. DBT has helped me manage my mood swings, and I'm finally learning to experience empathy and take accountability. My partner is incredibly understanding while also holding me responsible, which has made a significant difference. Still, it feels like I'm grieving my mother all over again, while simultaneously grieving the toxic, uninformed, and ill-equipped version of myself that I'm trying to let go of. I want more from life than mere existence, and while directing some of the empathy I've learned inward is challenging, I'm not ready to give up just yet. Story 33. This summer, I experienced my first encounter with alcohol at a friend's house, along with another friend, M. It was just the three of us. While I had previous experience with marijuana, the combination of alcohol and cannabis was entirely new territory for me. I had also been restricting my food intake due to struggles with binge eating, desperately trying to control my consumption. Things escalated between the male friend and me that night, culminating in sexual activity while we were both intoxicated and high. It was my first time. The next morning, still tipsy and disoriented, having not eaten for 10 to 15 hours, which likely exacerbated my condition. I awoke early due to my genetic predisposition and usual sleep schedule. Then I committed an unforgivable act, something I had sworn I would never do. I touched him inappropriately while he was sleeping. He moved my hand away, and I immediately stopped. When he awoke later, he initiated intimate contact again, so at the time, I didn't fully process the gravity of what I had done. It took me 2 days to fully recall the incident, and when I did, I was horrified by my actions. I apologized to both him and my friend, but understandably, they've completely cut me out of their lives. Nearly 3 months have passed, and I still feel disgusted with myself. I've started relapsing into unhealthy habits and feel as though I've destroyed my future before it's even begun. I can't comprehend why I did it, and this uncertainty torments me daily. My mental state has deteriorated significantly. I feel undeserving of food, experience mild hallucinations, and wake up each morning wishing I hadn't. I'm acutely aware of the wrongness of my actions, and I desperately wish I could undo that moment. I just don't know how to move forward. Story 34. I've been in a relationship for 3 years now. The first year was tumultuous, but it has since evolved into a loving and caring partnership. Our intimate life is frequent and satisfying. However, before this relationship, I lived a very different lifestyle. I engaged in casual encounters frequently, enjoying the freedom to explore new bodies and experiences. It became a significant part of my identity and even developed into a kink. Now that I'm in a committed relationship, I feel like I've sacrificed something fundamental to who I am. I love my girlfriend deeply. She's worked hard to address her personal issues, which she openly admits were responsible for much of our early relationship drama. I feel guilty for these feelings because she truly is amazing. I've tried to address this by encouraging her to explore sexually with other people, so she doesn't experience the same sense of missing out that I do. To my knowledge, she's had mild encounters with 2 people, and I was genuinely happy for her. However, she's told me it felt like cheating, and she's not comfortable with that dynamic. We've discussed visiting a swinger club and even the possibility of threesomes, which she's open to exploring, but it's not the same as an open relationship. She's unsure if she could handle it emotionally in the long term, given her self-esteem and jealousy issues. I'm not looking to replace her or find emotional connections elsewhere. She's perfect for me in every way, including sexually. I don't understand why I feel this way, and it frustrates me immensely. I've always maintained that I would never cheat, but sometimes I worry that in the right circumstances, if I were emotional, stoned, or drunk, I might give in. That's why I completely avoid alcohol and weed, and stay home during particularly difficult periods. I don't want to hurt her or jeopardize our relationship. I'm just trying to understand the source of these feelings and how to manage them effectively. Story 35. I work in an emergency room where every day is a chaotic symphony of high-stress situations. I witness people experiencing the worst moments of their lives, trauma injuries, heart attacks, seizures, and more. We frequently have to deliver devastating news to families, informing them that their loved ones didn't survive, or that their lives will never be the same. We strive to save everyone, but sometimes, despite doing everything perfectly, someone dies on the table. It's frighteningly easy to become desensitized to it all. When I have to tell a crying family that their loved one didn't make it, part of my mind is calculating how long this conversation is keeping me from the floor and how quickly I can make my exit. When someone arrives with a broken leg, crying in pain, I find myself growing irritated because as excruciating as it is for them, it's not a priority over the patients who are literally dying. Of course, I can't simply say, "You'll be in agony for the next 6 hours because we're understaffed and your condition isn't life-threatening." Instead, I must mask my frustration and exhaustion behind a veneer of professional bedside manner. I love my job and I'm passionate about helping people, but the endless stream of patients can feel overwhelming. There's always another gunshot wound, another seizure, another crisis. I'm exhausted, and I return home feeling guilty. Guilty that I'm numb to it all, guilty that my empathy sometimes feels performative, guilty that the best advice I can offer new staff is, "You'll get used to it." The only thing that sustains me is the bond one share with my coworkers. We all experience these same feelings, and knowing I'm not alone in this makes it bearable. Story 36. My depressive BPD episodes often feel like internal implosions. I stop eating or binge on junk food, drink heavily alone at all hours, smoke weed continuously, and escape into anything I can find. These destructive patterns have led most of my high school acquaintances to assume I've probably ended my life by now. The most disturbing part is that I've grown comfortable living this way. I attempted suicide twice when I was younger because I couldn't handle the pain, and now I feel like I'm simply waiting out my days, or perhaps waiting to find an easier way to end it all. It feels inevitable. My life seems as insignificant as my mother's was. She couldn't help herself, became dependent on alcohol and sleeping pills, and spent her existence talking about suicide and regrets. She passed away in 2020 at 52 from an untreated heart condition and a blood clot. Nothing ever improved for her. She was one of the most devastated and depressed individuals I've ever known. Watching her spiral was heartbreaking, and now I find myself devastating those close to me in the same way. I'm in therapy and have become more self-aware. DBT has helped me manage my mood swings, and I'm finally learning to experience empathy and take accountability. My partner is incredibly understanding while also holding me responsible, which has made a significant difference. Still, it feels like I'm grieving my mother all over again, while simultaneously grieving the toxic, uninformed, and ill-equipped version of myself that I'm trying to let go of. I want more from life than mere existence, and while directing some of the empathy I've learned inward is challenging, I'm not ready to give up just yet. Story 37. I had a close friend who drifted away, but he reconnected by sending me a letter from prison. Initially, he withheld the reason for his incarceration, and I promised to maintain our friendship, believing I knew him well enough to trust he wasn't truly a bad person. Even if his crime was serious, I thought I could handle it. When he finally revealed the truth, I was devastated. He had been arrested for possession of child pornography and attempting to meet a minor. In his last letter, he detailed how he was caught in a sting operation. Reading his words made me physically ill with anger, disgust, and heartbreak. He even tried to justify his actions, claiming he wouldn't have actually harmed the child. I nearly vomited. I wrote several letters expressing my emotions and sense of betrayal, but I never sent them. I couldn't bring myself to respond. Eventually, I learned he had been convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Even writing this makes me feel sick. I don't think I'll ever fully process or recover from this betrayal. You think you know someone, and then something like this happens. Story 38. I engage in full-length conversations with myself, and while it might sound peculiar, I don't fit the criteria for schizophrenia. I've been doing this since I was about 8 years old. It serves as a calming mechanism when I feel like an outsider or when I'm grappling with something difficult. Deep down, I know I'm the only person who can provide the answers I'm seeking. I often take long evening walks, and after a while, I'll begin talking to myself. It usually starts with a question like, "What do you think about?" I'll then respond as if I'm someone else, offering counterpoints to my own thoughts. For example, if I say Dave's such a jerk, my out-loud response might be, "Well, you did kind of provoke him." I'm fully aware that I'm talking to myself as if I'm another person, but it's an effective way to examine situations from different perspectives. It's also been incredibly helpful for anger management, as I have a bad temper, though thankfully a long fuse. I'm not sharing this because I think something is wrong with me. I know it's unusual, but it's a useful tool for processing emotions and gaining insight. I just wonder if anyone else does this too. Story 39. I harbor a deep-seated resentment toward a stranger because she developed a closer relationship with my grandfather than I ever managed to achieve. My grandfather passed away this February at the age of 93. For the past decade, following my grandmother's death, he had resided in an excellent retirement facility where he forged close friendships with other residents and staff members. Last December, he suffered a severe spinal injury during a storm, which ultimately led to his passing 2 months later. My family initially believed he would recover, given his historical resilience. He had survived multiple strokes and injuries throughout his life. Because of this optimistic outlook, I didn't make an extra effort to call him more frequently after the injury. I had always imagined we would develop a stronger bond as I grew older. We shared many interests, history, political discussions, and other intellectual pursuits, but I never had the opportunity to connect with him on those levels. Living in different states, family dynamics, and COVID restrictions made visits rare. By the time I finally called him, he didn't even recognize me. At his funeral, a young woman spoke about their close relationship. She was the daughter of a janitor at the facility and had helped extensively during quarantine. She shared story after story about their time together, about how much he meant to her, and how deeply his death had affected her. I sat there, seething with jealousy and guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had usurped my place. I had already felt like a failure as a granddaughter for not being closer to him, and her speech only amplified those feelings. I didn't speak at his funeral because I had no stories to share, nothing to say. She did. I know my anger is irrational, but it's something I've struggled with since his passing. I feel like I failed at one of the most important relationships in my life because I kept postponing it until the right time, a time that will never come now. I've tried to process these feelings through therapy and even wrote an essay about it for school, which received positive feedback. Still, I can't help but feel like I let my grandfather down. I just hope that wherever he is, he's proud of me. He shaped so much of who I am, even if I didn't realize it while he was alive. Story 40. I harbor an intense hatred for my mother's friend, a woman who fundamentally altered my mother's character. Before their friendship, my mother was a nurturing presence who never raised her voice in anger. After they became close, everything changed dramatically. My mother began swearing, administering physical punishment, and cursing at us, behavior she clearly adopted from her friend, who regularly treated her own children with similar cruelty. I was frequently forced into situations where I had to interact with her children, and I absolutely detested them, especially her daughter. I would watch helplessly as my mother's friend brutally disciplined her children, and it filled me with rage. She even had another friend who occasionally joined our circle, and one day this woman slapped me across the face because she deemed me too loud. I was simply excited about being somewhere new, and that slap left an indelible mark on my psyche. This toxic environment completely destroyed my relationship with my mother. I felt her resentment growing, and in response, I became increasingly rebellious and bitter. I couldn't view her as a safe haven anymore, a devastating realization for an only daughter. I remember one incident when I arrived at school bearing bruises, prompting my teacher to schedule a meeting with my mother. She showed up with her friend in tow, and only later did I understand that this friend had coached her on what to tell the teacher. As a child, I didn't recognize the abuse as wrong. I believed I deserved it due to my hyperactive nature. Now, with adult perspective, I see how profoundly it affected me. I've attempted to repair my relationship with my mother, and while we're in a better place now, the childhood pain still lingers. I've told her how much I despise her friend, but she doesn't understand the depth of my childhood fear and insecurity. That constant fear and lack of safety destroyed my self-confidence. I overthink everything and live in perpetual fear of failure. I struggle to form and maintain friendships, often preemptively cutting people off before they have the chance to hurt me. Now that I have a son of my own, I cannot fathom treating any child the way I was treated. When I reflect on it, I break down in tears. I'm determined to provide my child with the safety, love, and support I never received. Story 1. When I was 7 years old, a dark secret began to haunt me, one that I've carried silently for over 3 decades. Left alone at home one fateful day, I became the architect of a catastrophe that nearly consumed our entire house. The fire department, upon discovering me trembling outside, informed my mother, who had been at her workplace, that an electrical malfunction was to blame. But the truth was far more chilling. In reality, my childish fascination with fire had led me to experiment with a lighter, methodically burning the delicate tassels at the edge of my bedspread. I would extinguish each small flame with calculated precision, until that terrible moment when the fire escaped my control. The inferno spread rapidly, engulfing my entire bed. The intense heat triggered an electrical short circuit in a nearby outlet, inadvertently providing the perfect cover story for my dangerous game. Now at 40, I still carry this burden. My mother remains blissfully unaware of the truth, but the memory burns bright in my mind, especially the searing heat against my face as I desperately fought to contain the flames of my own making. Story 2. For years, I've harbored a heart-wrenching secret about my best friend's husband. Our friendship began in high school when I was 16, and 3 years later, she met the man who would become her spouse. Over time, I forged an unexpected bond with him, one that ran deeper than mere friendship, evolving into a profound sibling-like connection. Given my best friend's cognitive challenges and anxiety issues, I often found solace in confiding in him instead. Last October, fate dealt us a cruel blow when he succumbed to AML leukemia. In the aftermath, I stepped forward as my best friend's pillar of strength. I orchestrated his memorial service, handled the cremation arrangements, later reimbursed through life insurance, and became her emotional anchor. But beneath my supportive exterior, I'm quietly crumbling. Trust doesn't come easily to me, and he was among the precious few in whom I felt safe confiding. His loss has left an unbearable void, yet I have nowhere to turn with my grief. The very person I would have sought comfort from is gone. I can't bring myself to share these feelings with my best friend. Her pain is already overwhelming, and I feel compelled to maintain my strength for her sake. This delicate balance of managing my own grief while supporting hers has become an exhausting daily struggle. Story 3. I carry a complicated secret about my friend's streaming career. He frequently boasts about his growing Twitch following, completely unaware that the majority of his viewers and followers are actually me. His initial depression over his lack of audience moved me to create multiple fake Twitch accounts using a Google Workspace account, carefully crafting various aliases to populate his channel. The situation has spiraled beyond my control. He's begun bragging to our friend group about his expanding audience, and I find myself trapped in an increasingly complex web of deception. I'm torn between gradually withdrawing my fake viewership, risking his return to depression, and maintaining this elaborate charade that has grown far beyond my original intentions. For those inquiring, I've deliberately withheld his stream link. A sudden influx of viewers wouldn't serve his best interests, and I'm concerned about him potentially discovering this post through a simple Google search. Instead, one of the commenters below has shared a link to a child's stream. If you're looking to make a positive impact, consider following their channel instead, though it appears the moderators have since removed the post. Story 4. I've been harboring a profound realization about friendship and acceptance. One of my oldest and dearest friends, someone I'd known since first grade, chose his two brothers and a mutual friend from high school as his groomsmen for his wedding. Initially, this decision stung. After all, our friendship predated his relationship with the mutual friend by many years. Despite the hurt, I attended his wedding and found genuine joy in the celebration. Years later, when planning my own wedding, I spent considerable time reflecting on this situation. He was an obvious choice for my groomsmen, and through this contemplation, I discovered something vital. Friendships don't need to be perfectly reciprocal to be meaningful and genuine. I've come to understand that loving someone means accepting them wholly, including decisions that might cause personal pain. I chose him as my groomsman, and he accepted. Throughout the years, I've made a conscious effort to demonstrate the value I place on our friendship, because it truly means the world to me. Interestingly, he's since expressed regret, saying things like, "I should have had you as a groomsman." But for me, this friendship transcends such formalities. I cherish our connection because of who he is as a person. That's a choice I've made, and one I stand by without reservation. Certainly, people can disappoint and hurt us, but his wedding party selection wasn't enough to damage our fundamental bond. Even without that particular honor, he consistently shows that he values our friendship. Weddings are complicated affairs, fraught with social pressures and family expectations. When my turn came, I was fortunate to have a fiancée, now wife, who supported me in making authentic choices, which was particularly challenging for someone like me who tends to prioritize others' happiness. My advice to others is simple yet profound. If you value someone's friendship, demonstrate it through both words and actions. Show up for them, include them in your life. If they don't reciprocate, perhaps it's time to reevaluate the relationship. But don't let a single event, even one as significant as a wedding, define the entire relationship. Story 5. During my college years, I experienced a trauma that continues to haunt me. My floor mates, claiming they wanted to help me overcome a previous negative sexual experience, orchestrated what they called an intervention. At a pre-party gathering, they deliberately plied me with drink after drink. In my naivety, I interpreted their attention as genuine kindness, but one of those drinks harbored a sinister secret. It was drug. The night becomes a blur after that point. I have no recollection of leaving the dormitory, though I was later told we visited a bar. The next thing I remember is awakening in my room, naked, with a condom still attached, and an unfamiliar young woman sitting at my desk. Paralyzed with shock, I managed to ask her what had happened. Her response chills me to this day. "I only stayed because I thought you might be dead." I can't believe they convinced me to do this. I had never seen her before, but after that day, I would occasionally glimpse her around campus. We both made conscious efforts to avoid each other. When I confronted my floor mates, they became defensive and dismissive, suggesting I should be grateful for being set up with an attractive girl. They never acknowledged the gravity of their actions or offered any apology. 9 years have passed, and people still question my persistent single status. They say things like, "You have such a big heart, you'd make someone so happy." I've only confided in one person about this incident, and their response, "At least it wasn't real rape," shattered something inside me. Since then, I've kept this secret buried deep within. I live in constant fear that my story won't be taken seriously. I've never experienced a healthy relationship or positive sexual encounter since that night. At this point in my life, I question whether I'll ever heal enough to achieve either. The thought of starting a relationship now, potentially entering marriage in my 30s, if marriage is even possible for someone as damaged as me, seems increasingly unlikely. The prospect of having children feels equally distant. I'm beginning to accept a life of solitude, even though it's not the future I would have chosen for myself. Story 6. My life has become an endless cycle of heartbreak and exhaustion. My partner, once vibrant and full of life, now struggles with the devastating effects of brain damage following a sudden illness. Most days, he resembles the man I fell in love with, but there are moments when he transforms into someone entirely foreign. A stranger who becomes consumed by confusion and rage, who looks at me with vacant eyes, unable to recognize the person who has shared his life for 13 years. During these episodes, I find myself in the cruel position of having to repeatedly break his heart, reminding him that his beloved father has passed away. To outsiders, he appears merely quieter than before, but they don't witness his lost moments, the times when he stares through me as if I'm a complete stranger. The weight of this reality is crushing me. I'm drowning in responsibilities, juggling work, studies, caring for him, volunteering, and now facing an impending house move because life apparently hasn't thrown enough challenges our way. The physical demands of the move will fall primarily on my shoulders due to his mobility issues. I know the change will trigger confusion and distress in him, but I refuse to abandon him. My love for him runs too deep. Yet the most heart-wrenching aspect of our situation is the death of our shared dreams. We had been planning to start a family, even selecting names for our future children. He still speaks about parenthood with such pure excitement, sharing beautiful visions of our life as parents. But I've had to silently accept a harsh truth. It's likely an impossible dream now. His mobility and memory issues make it too dangerous. How could I leave a baby in his care when he sometimes forgets that he's turned on the oven? I desperately yearn for his child, for our baby, but I've learned to suppress my excitement whenever he brings it up. I can't bear to tell him that his condition is the reason our dream may never materialize. Each time we discuss it, my heart shatters anew. The devastation is overwhelming. We're not bad people. We've lived quietly, helping others whenever possible. Yet life seems determined to test us beyond our limits. This latest realization feels like the final cruel twist of fate, and I'm not sure how much more I can endure. I've never felt such intense hatred toward whatever cosmic force or deity might exist. Every morning, I wake from my fitful sleep begging for relief, longing for our old life, for my partner as he was, for the future we had planned. The anger consumes me, even as people advise me to be grateful that his condition isn't worse. Yes, I am thankful he defied the initial prognosis that predicted he'd be wheelchair-bound, but that doesn't invalidate my pain. This tragedy didn't just happen to him, it happened to us. While he has no memory of that horrific night, I remember every excruciating detail. His seizures in bed, my frantic call to emergency services, performing CPR, and his terrified voice calling my name before another seizure pulled him into a 26-hour unconsciousness. The randomness of it all compounds the tragedy. He had no history of epilepsy or major health issues. It struck without warning, destroying the life we had built together. I acknowledge that others may face worse circumstances, and I hate how self-pitying I sound, but I've reached my breaking point. Whatever force governs our fate, I beg you, leave him alone. He's a good, kind, gentle soul who deserves none of this suffering. Please just stop, because I don't know how much more of this I can bear. Story 7. A select few know about the devastating loss I experienced in 2014 when someone incredibly dear to me died by suicide. He was an extraordinary soul, the kind of person who would journey 2 hours by train just to share a cup of tea and a slice of cake with me. His presence in my life was so constant, so dependable, that I never entertained the possibility of his absence. He embodied joy itself. Every joke was the most hilarious, every brownie the most delectable, every moment seemingly filled with boundless happiness. What torments me most is what I've never shared. In the days leading up to his death, my phone lit up with several missed calls from him. I vividly remember watching one call ring through, deliberately choosing not to answer. He sent me a message, pleading for me to call when I had the chance. I had many opportunities, but I never made that call. Later that week, I awoke to find a message from him. One so extensive that when transferred to a Word document, it took me 2 full days to read completely. He poured out his life story, expressed his feelings of insignificance, praised my character, and concluded with an apology. Shortly after, I received an email from his mother informing me that he had ended his life by jumping in front of a moving train. I've never been particularly sociable, though I've always cared deeply and strived to do what's right. Since that day, I've made a conscious decision to never keep kind thoughts unspoken. Now I regularly check on people, bake treats for them, and never let a phone call go unanswered. It's my way of keeping a piece of him alive in this world. This experience has taught me that the absence of kindness can be as destructive as active malice. I wish I had realized this sooner. When you encounter someone who appears to embrace each day with extraordinary enthusiasm, living as if it might be their last, it very well could be. That's why I've made an unbreakable promise to always answer the phone. While I can't change the past, I'll carry this guilt for the remainder of my life. I've made peace with that burden, if it means his memory lives on. My father once shared a comforting thought about the afterlife, that everyone will be resurrected in their perfect form. This gives me solace, knowing I might recognize him again someday. He was a remarkable friend, perfect in every way. I only hope I'll have the chance to seek his forgiveness. Story 8. I grew up in the suffocating embrace of a charismatic evangelical cult. At 16 or 17, I endured a horrific experience, a physical, not sexual, assault by the pastor and several church members during what they called an exorcism, supposedly to cure my depression and suicidal thoughts. Needless to say, their violent intervention failed spectacularly. Shortly after, I attempted to end my life, and had I succeeded, I wouldn't be here sharing this story. In the aftermath of my attempt, I spent countless nights crying into the phone, reaching out to suicide and trans helplines. I desperately begged them not to alert authorities, knowing it would only exacerbate my situation. One particularly difficult night, my sister discovered me in the bathroom, where I had been crying so violently that I'd made myself physically ill. She was only 14 or 15 at the time, yet she showed remarkable compassion. She comforted me in ways that have blurred with time, but what remains crystal clear is her unwavering kindness, her genuine concern, and how she supported me despite my intense self-loathing. She has consistently been my greatest advocate. 6 years later, We both managed to escape our parents, toxic individuals who still attend the same church where I was assaulted, steadfastly believing the cult did nothing wrong. I've maintained no contact with them for almost a year, while my sister occasionally communicates with them, maintaining firm boundaries, something that fills me with immense pride. Recently, I celebrated my 22nd birthday, my first without my parents. My sister baked me a cake, gave me a present, and organized a small gathering. What I didn't tell her was that sadness permeated the entire day. None of my family wished me happy birthday, which was what I wanted, yet it still carved a deep wound in my heart. Deep down, I still yearn for my parents' love. I'm still that frightened child who desperately wants his father to express pride instead of calling him a failure or worse. I long for my mother to accept me unconditionally, to tell me I'm perfect just as I am. To cope with my trauma and my fear of therapy, I turned to heavy drug use. I've now maintained sobriety for 5 months, but some days the memories overwhelm me, and the cravings return with crushing force. I'm grateful that I no longer have connections to any dealers. Otherwise, I might have succumbed to another overdose. I'm fighting to heal, but the journey is arduous. Through it all, I'm eternally thankful for my sister, who remains my unwavering foundation. Story 9. As a child, I developed an unusual fascination with lock-picking. One fateful day, when I was around 10 or 11, I managed to breach my father's bedroom safe. Inside, I discovered a disassembled firearm. I believe it was a 9mm, along with a box of ammunition. In my juvenile mind, I saw this as an intriguing puzzle, a challenge to reassemble the weapon. Once I had successfully pieced the gun together, a friend stopped by, and we made the reckless decision to take it into the woods, intent on shooting at birds or whatever targets we might find. At one point, the weapon failed to fire, and we naively assumed it must be empty. My friend carelessly pointed the barrel at himself and me as we examined it, trying to understand why it wouldn't shoot. When he handed it back to me, declaring it must be empty, the unthinkable happened. The gun discharged into the ground during the exchange. We could have easily become tragic statistics that day, miles from any possible help. That moment instilled in me a profound fear of firearms that persists to this day. I didn't escape punishment for my actions. The scratches I'd made while assembling the gun betrayed my tampering. I accepted the consequences without protest, acutely aware of how fortunate we'd been to survive my foolish experiment. My father, being a wise and responsible man, made the crucial decision to remove the gun from our home once he realized I could access the safe. Years later, that choice would prove instrumental in saving my life. During a particularly dark period in my teenage years, I returned to that safe with desperate intentions, only to find the gun absent. That simple decision of his granted me the chance to continue living. For the past 3 decades, I've carried immense gratitude for that act of foresight. Story 10. I came into this world as an unplanned pregnancy to 2 20-year-olds who shared no love but married solely because of my impending arrival. Our life was marked by constant upheaval. We never remained in one place for more than a year. My parents' financial instability and my father's night shift work meant we perpetually moved between apartments or sought refuge with my grandparents. I never bothered to forge friendships or social connections, knowing they would inevitably be severed by our next relocation. Then tragedy struck. My maternal grandfather succumbed to cancer, and a year later, my mother died from a painkiller overdose. The circumstances of her death remain ambiguous. No one knows if it was intentional or accidental, though my grandmother steadfastly maintains it wasn't suicide. However, given that my parents had been embroiled in such severe conflicts that my father had retreated to his parents' home, I believe she deliberately chose to end her life. Growing up motherless left me emotionally stunted, unable to develop proper social skills or experience empathy. Medical professionals suspect I suffer from reactive attachment disorder, RAD, which renders forming meaningful connections with others nearly impossible. I've become emotionally numb, feeling like an empty vessel masquerading as a person. When my step-grandfather passed away, I felt nothing, despite knowing him for a decade. He used to give me $2 bills for my birthdays, a touching gesture considering his modest means. Yet his death elicited no emotional response from me, a stark reminder of how profoundly broken I am. I've become a social pariah, friendless, with what little family remains keeping their distance due to the bitter, narcissistic person I've evolved into. Sometimes I wish life had dealt me different cards, but I've come to accept that my current misery is now my own responsibility to bear. Story 11. Deep within my consciousness lurks a truth that haunts me daily. I know, with crushing certainty, that I'll never be good enough. One of my darkest memories stems from my traumatized childhood, a scene that plays out in my mind with horrifying clarity. I was hidden inside a pull-out sofa, my entire body trembling with terror as I listened to my young friend enduring a brutal beating from her parent. She had desperately warned me to hide and remain silent, knowing my presence was forbidden. If they find out, they'll kill me. she had whispered urgently. When her father finally left the room, I emerged from my hiding place to find her struggling to breathe, her small body covered in blood. Paralyzed with fear, but knowing she needed help, I forced myself to act. I ran to a nearby neighbor's house, my appearance surely terrifying, a child covered in blood, stumbling over words, trying to communicate that my friend needed help, that I feared she was dying. The neighbors immediately called the police and insisted I wait with them. When they brought her out of the house, she was enclosed in a black bag. At the time, I didn't comprehend the full meaning of this, but the officer's gentle approach told me everything. Honey, I don't know how to tell you this. My heart plummeted before he could finish. I already knew. Even as a child, I felt an emptiness take root inside me, a void that has remained ever since. The image of her haunts me to this day, and every time I recall that moment, I'm transported back to that overwhelming sense of helplessness, grief, and trauma. Story 12. For 2 excruciating years, I endured repeated sexual assault at the hands of my ex-girlfriend and fiancé. Few believe my story because I'm male. She employed various methods of coercion, sometimes getting me intoxicated, other times resorting to threats. She would banish me from our bed, or force me to sleep on the floor unless I complied with her demands. She wielded the threat of false domestic violence accusations like a weapon, warning she would tell her parents I was hitting her if I refused her advances. When manipulation failed, she would become physically aggressive, hurling bottles or pillows at me, sometimes targeting my computer. If these tactics proved ineffective, she would dissolve into dramatic tears or scream incessantly until I yielded. She systematically destroyed my credibility among our friends, spreading false claims about my mental health, insisting I had schizophrenia, which I don't, and suggesting my recollection of events was unreliable. She publicly humiliated me, mocking my weight, despite my healthy size, and sexual performance in front of our social circle. No one intervened to help me. She nearly ended my life on 9 separate occasions. Now I struggle with debilitating relationship anxiety and severe memory issues. I find myself unable to remember basic details about my current partner, dates, names, or their preferences in movies, games, and shows. I maintain a memory journal to track these details, but even then, information still slips through the cracks. This trauma manifests in ways that make me feel like a complete failure, and it pains me to see how it affects my current relationship. I desperately want to trust people, but I find it nearly impossible. When I attempt to discuss my past, I'm met with disbelief, but I know the truth of what happened to me. I was raped, and the scars of that experience continue to shape my life in ways I'm still discovering and learning to navigate. Story 13. For a decade, I lived a double life as a drug dealer, trafficking cocaine and marijuana. It was a fast-paced existence fueled by easy money, but recently, my carefully constructed world came crashing down when law enforcement finally caught up with me. In an ironic twist of fate, the officers who arrested me only discovered the marijuana stash. They conducted a search of my residence, but somehow missed the 2 firearms I had concealed and the 40 packages of cocaine hidden in my vehicle. They found 19 bags of marijuana and a knife in their search. I entered a guilty plea, explaining away the knife as fishing equipment, a claim that proved successful as that charge was eventually dropped. My sentence was remarkably lenient, a 2-year suspended sentence and a 530-pound fine. The magnitude of my luck in avoiding discovery of the more serious contraband still astounds me. Since then, I've made a complete break from that lifestyle, transforming myself into a legitimate member of society. I rise at 5 a.m. daily and earn an honest living in construction. However, karma has extracted its price in other ways. My 4 children now know the truth about how I provided for them, and I can see the disappointment etched in their faces. My extended family is aware as well. My in-laws have banned me from their home and family functions, branding me as scum. My income has plummeted to a quarter of what it once was, and debt collectors have become unwelcome regular visitors at my door. The weight of shame and regret crushes me daily. Nothing I ever earned or acquired through that lifestyle was worth the cost. I wish I had never been seduced by the allure of easy money, as it has ultimately cost me far more than I could have imagined. Story 14. 7 years ago, my cousin, someone I shared an incredibly close bond with throughout most of my life, delivered a devastating blow by excluding me from his wedding party. He didn't even extend me the courtesy of my own invitation, instead lumping me in with my parents' invitation despite my living in a different city for college at the time. This slight fundamentally altered our relationship. Since then, our interactions have been limited to obligatory family functions. I've deleted his number from my contacts, and our only communication occurs through occasional, perfunctory comments on Facebook posts. The depth of my hurt stems from the knowledge that of the 3 individuals he chose for his wedding party, none shared the profound connection we had maintained. From age 12 to 20, we were inseparable, spending nearly every weekend together and taking turns driving to school. I never witnessed him investing that kind of time or energy in relationships with the other two groomsmen. I attended the wedding solely to avoid causing family drama, though my parents would have supported my absence. The entire celebration was an exercise in emotional endurance for me. I wish I could say I've moved past this betrayal, but the truth is I haven't. Resentment has taken root where affection once flourished. I treat him as I would a distant relative, someone I barely know. I've never met his children and feel no desire to do so. At family gatherings, I interact with him as I would with any other relative, with polite indifference. While I don't wish him or his marriage any ill will, I've already decided he won't receive an invitation to my wedding, and I feel completely at peace with that decision. He was once my best friend, but now he's merely someone who used to occupy space in my life. Story 15. During my college years, a close friend experienced a horrific sexual assault at a party. Her attacker was someone she knew, and during the assault, he brutally broke 2 of her ribs. She had been intoxicated when he forced himself upon her. A few weeks after this traumatic incident, our regular friend group was engaged in our usual playful roughhousing with couch cushions, something we'd done countless times since middle school. In a terrible twist of fate, I rolled off the couch with a large pillow and accidentally landed on her still-healing ribs. Her scream of pain sent us rushing to the hospital, where medical staff confirmed her ribs were indeed broken. She had only confided in one mutual female friend about the true cause of her initial injuries, choosing to let everyone else believe I was responsible for breaking her ribs. Consequently, our entire friend group, along with many high school acquaintances, labeled me as a woman beater, making me the target of endless cruel jokes. About a year later, our mutual friend revealed the truth to me about what had really happened. I asked her to keep this information between us, refusing to expose my friend's trauma. It wasn't my story to tell. I also didn't want to force her to relive the experience or feel compelled to explain it to anyone. For that entire year, I had carried the weight of guilt, often crying myself to sleep, believing I had seriously injured someone who was like a sister to me. But I knew her pain from the assault far outweighed any discomfort I endured from the misunderstandings. I've kept this secret ever since, and will carry it to my grave. Though I lost numerous friends and endured uncomfortable interactions because of the misconception, that was a decade ago. We've all moved forward with our lives, though the memory continues to linger. Story 16. Back in 1987 or 1988, when I was 6 or 7 years old, I committed my first theft, a Transformer toy from a small family-owned store. It was the 80s in France, and parents commonly left their children unattended while running errands. My mother would regularly drop me off at this particular shop. I had been coveting a specific Transformer for weeks, a gray plane, though not Starscream. I already possessed Bumblebee, but yearned for more. My parents' policy was strict. Toys were reserved for birthdays, Christmas, or as rewards for good grades. I knew begging would prove futile. One day, when the store was nearly empty and the owner occupied behind the register, I seized my opportunity. My heart thundered in my chest as I carefully pried open the box with trembling fingers. I managed to extract the toy without making a sound and concealed it within my puffy winter jacket. I returned the empty box to the shelf, hiding it behind other merchandise. Then came the excruciating wait. I couldn't simply leave because my mother hadn't returned yet. I wandered the aisles, pretending to examine Barbie dolls to avoid arousing suspicion. Every second felt like an eternity as I sweated profusely, terrified someone would notice the suspicious bulge in my jacket or discover the empty box. Finally, after what seemed like hours, my mother returned. I maintained my composure, claiming I hadn't found anything interesting, and we left. Once home, I waited for the perfect moment to smuggle the toy from my coat to my room. I played with it secretly for days, keeping it buried at the bottom of my toy chest when not in use. Eventually, my father caught me playing with it and inquired about its origin. I fabricated a story about trading it with a school friend, which he accepted without further questioning. For months afterward, I was consumed by guilt, feeling as though I'd committed a major crime. I avoided the store for an entire year, telling my mother I preferred staying with her during errands, which she appreciated. Time gradually dulled the memory, and looking back now, it seems like a rather silly childhood secret. However, at the time, it felt like the most daring act I'd ever undertaken. Story 17. I harbor a devastating uncertainty about my relationship. I don't know if I truly want to spend the rest of my life with my partner, and this doubt terrifies me. We've shared almost a decade together, and he's been an unwavering pillar of support throughout my life. He stood by me through college, offering strength when I needed it most, particularly during our challenging early days when we relocated to an unfamiliar city as young adults. During that period, I battled severe depression, which took a toll on our intimate life. Years have passed since then, but we've both allowed ourselves to drift into complacency. My preferences in men have evolved, and his habits now grate on my nerves. He spends countless hours at his computer, and I suspect he's no longer physically attracted to me, though I couldn't blame him if that were true. I struggle to remember our last proper date, a trip to the movies or a dinner out. Our physical intimacy has become mechanical. I haven't experienced genuine pleasure in months. He stopped kissing me during our encounters. He seems to drift through life without any concrete goals or ambitions. Perhaps most painfully, our love languages have become completely misaligned. I crave physical affection and verbal reassurance, someone to hold me, express their love, and show kindness. These gestures have become increasingly rare from him. Sometimes I wish he loved me more deeply, desired me more intensely. There are moments when I feel like a mere spectator in his life. Part of me can't imagine existence without him. Yet another part questions if I can commit to feeling this way indefinitely. I experience periods of complete devotion, but they're interspersed with moments of doubt when I wonder if I'm in love with the person I wish he would become rather than who he actually is. This internal conflict tears at my heart daily. Story 18. I grew up in the suffocating grip of a cult that my grandmother has controlled for 45 years. Even in her advanced age, she maintains an iron grip on her domain. Her methodology for acquiring children is calculated and chilling. She systematically kidnaps them by alienating them from their parents, creating complete dependency on herself. Her technique is precisely orchestrated. She targets vulnerable young women, offering them and their children sanctuary. These women surrender 90% of their income to her under the pretense of covering expenses. Eventually, they reach their breaking point and attempt to leave with their children. That's when my grandmother begins her psychological warfare, bombarding them with guilt-ridden phone calls, warning that their lifestyle choices will destroy their children's futures. Many of these mothers ultimately leave their children in her care, reverting to their previous destructive patterns, drugs, alcohol, or other self-destructive behaviors. Child Protective Services frequently investigates her residence, and the mothers often lose custody to her through legal channels. I became ensnared in her web at age 3. My parents had recently escaped her compound in Texas, establishing a new life in Ohio. We were staying at a motel while my father worked maintenance to cover our expenses. One day, he stepped outside to use a payphone to order pizza, leaving me briefly with a friend. That friend, coveting my father's position, reported him to authorities for child abandonment, despite my father remaining within sight of our room door the entire time. The police removed me from my loving parents, and since my grandmother was my closest blood relative, I was placed in her custody for the next 12 years. She indoctrinated me with lies, that my parents didn't love me, that my father had sexually abused me, that I was mentally ill requiring dangerous levels of medication for my age. By age 10, I was managing household cooking and cleaning. At 11, I became responsible for 2 younger children. When I turned 15, I discovered an old letter that had slipped behind a filing cabinet, a desperate plea from a woman begging my grandmother to allow her to see her child, even just once, after more than a year of separation. As I read the letter, I noticed my own name. My grandmother had never taken in another child with my name. This was the first clue to my true identity. I realized the story about my mother not loving me was a fabrication, and I began questioning everything I'd been told. I reached out to my mom through Facebook, and 5 years later, I'm now living with both my parents. Even as an adult, I'm still processing the magnitude of this deception. My entire existence until 5 years ago was built on lies, and it's challenging to reconcile. The physical abuse I endured left my bones susceptible to dislocation, and the emotional trauma filled me with self-doubt. But I survived. I endured genuine hell, complete, absolute hell, and emerged on the other side. For the first time in my life, I'm experiencing true happiness, even if I don't always feel like a proper adult. Thank you for listening to my story, strangers. Story 19. I carry a crushing burden of guilt over my sister's death. On that fateful day, she desperately pleaded with us to call an ambulance. I can still hear her voice, filled with urgency and fear. Our mother, however, insisted on driving her to the hospital herself. I sat paralyzed with indecision as my sister begged me to make the call. I even managed to whisper to my mother, "Please just call them." But she remained adamant about driving. None of us anticipated that these would be her final moments. I've tried to console myself with the rationalization that she reached the hospital faster with our mother driving, a direct journey without waiting for an ambulance to arrive and transport her. Yet the guilt persists, gnawing at my conscience. She collapsed at the hospital, right at the reception desk. She had just finished signing in and was receiving her identification bracelet when she suddenly fell. The medical team's attempts to revive her proved futile. It was too late. This memory haunts me. I've never shared it with my therapist, terrified of facing judgment for my inaction. If I could revisit that moment, armed with the knowledge I now possess, I would have made that call regardless of the consequences. Even if it wouldn't have altered the outcome, at least I would have the peace of mind of knowing I had tried everything possible. I also carry the weight of another regret. not embracing her before she walked out the door that day. She knew she was dying, but we dismissed her fears because of her history with anxiety and other mental health challenges. I despise myself for remaining frozen in my fear instead of offering that final embrace. I think about her every single day. I'm so sorry. I love you and miss you more than words could ever express. Story 20. I harbor an intense hatred for my mother's friend, a woman who fundamentally altered my mother's character. Before their friendship, my mother was a nurturing presence who never raised her voice in anger. After they became close, everything changed dramatically. My mother began swearing, administering physical punishment, and cursing at us, behaviors she clearly adopted from her friend, who regularly treated her own children with similar cruelty. I was frequently forced into situations where I had to interact with her children, and I absolutely detested them, especially her daughter. I would watch helplessly as my mother's friend brutally disciplined her children, and it filled me with rage.